gentleman and lady. So we'll go straight to it. I'll request that you introduce yourselves. I'll begin from the very end. Your name and your company and a bit about your organization. Start from there. You, sir. Yes.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you. My name is Samir Ibrahim. I run a company called Sunculture. Most people know us as a solar irrigation company. We're the largest solar irrigation company in Africa. We use carbon revenues and embedded financial services to make the cost of solar irrigation cheaper than diesel and petrol pumps. What's become really interesting is we're now evolving into, I'll use a lot of buzzwords right now to explain this, but we're turning into almost a retail and fintech platform for smallholder farmers. All of our customers who are making more money with irrigation are asking us for more things. So we're starting to finance third-party products and services using our irrigation as collateral. So we'll see where the future goes for this, but for now we're a solar irrigation company. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Beck. I am co-founder and managing partner of Novastar Ventures. We are a venture capital fund manager, managing just under $300 million across now 3 funds. The first 2 funds were generalist VC, mainly kind of consumer-focused. Our third fund, though, is focused on climate and climate tech. And so we are now constructing that portfolio. We've made 2 investments so far, with 2 more past IC and up and running. So happy to have this conversation.
Yes, Lucretia.
Hi everyone. I'm Lucretia Chopera, Katapult Ocean Dew Flow Manager for Africa. Katapult is a global VC that's focused on specifically ocean investments within the climate sector. We are now growing our portfolio, or trying to, on the continent and also in Asia. We looked at our 76 investments in particular, and only 3 were in Africa. So we're trying to understand why we've seen limited deal flow and what we can do to actually grow not just opportunities, but there is an important impact factor to what we do in terms of looking at the size of the continent and how it translates to a really massive coastal region. So I'm very happy to be here. Thanks.
Yes, Erik.
Thank you. My name is Erik Nygard. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Kofa. We're currently based primarily out of Ghana, soon launching into Kenya. Our business is providing energy through swappable batteries. And really, it's a petrol displacement. So it's batteries for use in motorcycles or to displace petrol use in generators. So kind of multi-purpose in nature.
Thank you, sir. I'll start with you. Swapping the batteries, this electricity, like EVs, the electric vehicles are actually picking up in Africa a lot, especially in my country and East Africa, across the continent. But then the big question is, when it comes to the end life of the batteries, the question is, where do you have a plan, or do you have plans on where to take these batteries after their life, period is done? Because in my country, for example, we have, policy whereby every manufacturer has to have a plan on where the end product, like it's called the end use of the product, when the life is, you can't use it anymore. How do you recycle it back to use? So where do the batteries go back to?
End up?
Yeah.
I guess this will become a very apparent problem at some point when everybody needs to start finding ways to recycle or use them for second life. I think the honest answer is you can plan for it, but actually how it plays out, I think, is yet to be seen. I mean, we hope that at the end of the motorcycle use, we could probably recycle them, or I wouldn't say recycle, we can use them in other use cases that are more stationary, and maybe to provide support to homes or businesses, but more as a stationary asset. And you might extend life there by a couple years. But again, I say that's theoretical. You have to see if this actually plays out that way. The other possibility is that you start actually recycling the batteries, but you don't have recycling plants in Africa at the moment. So I know you can condense lithium down to something called black mass, which has an actual commoditized value. I mean, that would be, but I think you'd have to export the batteries out of Africa to achieve that. So I think it's a big question on how this materializes on the ground. Yeah, we would have to be attentive to it at all points, but.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, good. To you, Lucretia, investing in ocean, it's obviously a very expensive or complicated, venture to go into. I don't know, how do you maneuver through getting people to invest in the ocean economy?
Okay, so because we're talking about Africa and we're talking about very limited VC dollars that are channeled to Africa, it doesn't necessarily have to be, it's not all very expensive deep tech. Obviously for Katapult Ocean, because we're based in Norway and most of the portfolio is global, then there are different deal ticket sizes. But specific to Africa for this conversation, when we think about ocean and when we think about non-extractive, regenerative early stage investments that we're focusing on, it starts from very basic things. We think about the almost 50 million, fisheries that whose livelihood depend on the coastal region, and making sure that's done sustainably. We've got one of our portfolio companies that won the 8th short prize, Keep It Cool in Kenya. If you look at what he's doing and the investment that went in and how it's translating into impacting coastal communities in that region, the impact is massive, but the actual investment that went in, considering the impact, is very little. So what Francis and his team do is there were all these fragmented fisheries, right, that he's put on a platform, very low-tech software that he uses just to integrate them all, give them a pathway and access to market, but also it helps with compliance in terms of the policy holders understanding what's happening within the fishing industry. He also integrated alternative energy sources because of the region again. So he's got solar-powered refrigeration facilities that is given access to the fishing community that didn't have that. And then he also has refrigeration that limits the 40% of post-harvest that happens, and that's problematic in the fishing community. If you think about the impact of all that, then you actually see that it's very low investment that's needed to really make a huge impact in that region.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've done a story about Keep It Cool and just how much impact it has, especially in the business people, like the small businesses that are in the rurals, because we have places where there's zero electricity access, and so the solar comes in very handy, especially in the remote areas.
And what we love, and I think because I switched from commercial VC to this space for a reason. What we love about the impact stories, brings dignified jobs, right, for these fisheries. They get better prices for their catch now. We've got Abalobi in South Africa as well. I don't know how many of you would be aware of Fish with the Story, where when you're sitting in a restaurant in Cape Town, you actually can just, scan and actually read about the value chain from who the fisherman is to the Lani restaurant that you're in at some wine farm in Cape Town. So that visibility we didn't have before. And the actual tech that they use for that Abalobi is just a basic phone for the fishermen. But they've done exactly the same thing that Francis is doing in Kenya, just to make sure that they're dignified jobs, there are more jobs, there's less fragmentation. There's also really the part that I love, because, I'm all for female founders. A lot of cleaning of the fish actually is done by female businesses. But again, storage was an issue for most of them. So now they don't have to hurry and panic to make sure that they sell their fish quickly, because there's now refrigeration for them as well. So I really love, when we talk about people, planet, and profit, that's exactly what we're talking about. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money.
Can I add something quickly?
Yes, please.
You said you left the commercial investment world to be in this space. I don't think you necessarily need to separate impact and your commercial ambitions. And just one thing I want to clarify, a lot of people
Right,
think
yeah.
about impact and say you can't make money. And I don't think that's the right narrative. I think, my personal view, I think especially in the work that we do, you can make a ton of money doing things impactful, and it's really important to do that because unfortunately the world runs on incentives and people want to make money. So I think we need to show people that we can make money also while having impact. So I just...
Okay, I'll take that back. I'll reframe. I left fintech
Awesome.
to come to impact, but Katapult Ocean, by the way, has had 9 exits already. So it is commercial.
That's awesome.
I think the thesis that we're trying to prove is that you can actually make money in the fisheries whilst having a massive impact on the
It's
community.
a huge story to tell, right? There's not a lot of exits, and that's, I think, like...
Yeah.
I put that on the front of the website, like 9 exits.
Yeah,
like,
that's exactly
that's
what I'm
awesome.
saying.
And
So,
that is
yeah.
exactly what
Yeah.
will drive more capital into the space.
Exactly.
And I think I'll just throw my 2 cents worth in on this too, that I think, so I'm originally from the Silicon Valley. In the US, you can create a very big business by making the top 1% of the population their lives a little more convenient. You cannot do that in Africa. So you have to solve real world problems, fundamental problems for lots and lots of people, whether it's smallholder farmers making their farms more productive, or the kind of fishery industry. And if you do that, if you solve that problem, you're going to create a really valuable business. And by the way, you're going to have massive impact as well. So there's a nice alignment between a kind of commercial venture approach and strategy to an impact motivation, which I'm hearing comes through for you.
Right. And since you have the mic, your question is right. Yeah. All right.
I just used my mic.
Yeah. Right. We're looking at Africa that gets less than 1% of the global funding, according to recent studies. Why is that gap?
I mean, lots of reasons. I think we were hearing even this morning in the opening session some of the structural reasons of Africa being difficult. It's 54 different markets. It's got all the sort of political and currency volatility and so on. But I would rather turn the question around and think, so when I first started investing in Africa, it was in 2009. So I was writing personal checks into kind of seed stage businesses. We got our first fund up and running. It was an $80 million fund in 2014. We were, I think, the only institutional venture fund on the continent in 2014. There was, and Partech has been doing this every year, actually a service to the industry. And the numbers, of course, are a little flaky, but the estimates in 2014 was $100 million total venture funding on the continent of Africa in 2014. Okay, and we had all this kind of hype in 2021, and we backed up a little bit since then. But last year, same data set, same researchers, $3.2 billion. It's a 32x increase in 10 years. And there is now a discernible venture asset class, right? The DFIs, who have been a big part of the capital ladder in Africa, all discovered venture in 2018, 2019. Many of them who were skeptics when we were raising our first fund have dedicated venture teams, BII, FMO, Proparco. And so, while, yes, it's it's 1%, but it's growing, and I think I feel really optimistic and excited about the fact that we are seeing a discernible venture asset class with venture managers, with deal flow that is getting better every year, with now second or third time founders coming through, who that's actually a really good sign for the ecosystem as well. So I'm from California, so I kind of flip it and see the glass half full, but I think there's a lot of room there.
All
to grow.
And on the list of the countries that, African countries that are getting, big chunk of that 0.67% is Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Egypt. So where are the rest? There are 52 countries in Africa. So what are the others not doing right?
Yeah, I don't think, again, I'd be interested in other people's views on this, obviously, but venture capital is sort of an elitist sport, and venture capital has developed in cities or in very specific locations. Think Silicon Valley was this unique constellation of universities, kind of IP, entrepreneurship, and then the VCs sort of setting up there. And so we don't say the U.S. isn't getting venture capital, but it's concentrated in the Silicon Valley, around Cambridge, Massachusetts, and sort of that hub, New York. It's very centralized in a sense. And so I don't think of it as Kenya, Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa. I think of it as Nairobi, Lagos, Cairo, Cape Town. And those businesses that are being successful and they're growing outside of their home country. And so they are benefiting. So the best businesses in our portfolio are in not just in other countries in Africa, they're actually in South Asia now. So they are expanding outside of their home market. But it's natural that kind of venture-backed businesses will tend to center in hubs, in entrepreneurial hubs.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add that because I'm African, so I can call out, our policymakers as well and stuff. So I think private capital follows common sense policies sometimes, and sometimes our governments, they're just little tweaks in terms of policy changes that could just help with more stable currencies, that could help with, like in South Africa, we've got IP registration issues and challenges around our tech that holds back the tech. If we look at the story of East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, accelerators coming on because there is policy incentives that's kind of nudging, the ecosystem in that direction. So part of it is that. Part of it, there are, challenges that are historical because, Africa is massive. If you think about 1.5 billion, it's also quite challenging for our government policies to know what to prioritize and when. But in terms of what works for private capital, it's really, there's some common sense, I think, policy changes that would help. And also, I think with VC, the exit story in Africa is still quite limited because, they were talking about it, like these are pathways to exits that are obvious. That's why forums like this are really important to create, pathways that are easy to see that if I'm an investor, if I put in my money, I can not be guaranteed that it will come back, but at least there's a pathway that's visible that I can see. But without that, we're always going to struggle a little bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. And to you, Samir, Sunculture, how critical is it for that smallholder farmer to access this kind of technology?
I think the way to answer that is to play out what happens if they don't. So in Africa, you have 2/3 of the workforce is involved in agriculture. And if you look at any of the political change, armed conflict, mass migration that we've seen in Haiti or Madagascar or Syria or Egypt over the past 10, 15 years, all of that has been triggered by people migrating from rural areas to urban areas because of an inability to make money and grow food. So when you think about like what that does, and if you think about the Arab Spring, the thing that I am most scared about is that happening in like 10 or 15 countries at the same time, because East Africa is facing the worst drought they've seen in 70 years, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that forced migration could be one of the biggest threats to us in the next decade. So not only do we think about getting farmers access to the right technology and the right financing as a way to help them get themselves out of poverty, not only is it a way to help them grow food to serve their communities, not only is it a way to help prevent Africa from having to spend $100 billion importing food by 2050, but I think about it more as a national security issue globally. So I just play it out, and I'm like, it's a pretty scary world if that doesn't happen. It doesn't need to be what we do, but it needs to be something that enables smallholder farmers to grow more food and make money while serving their communities. Otherwise, people are going to move. You're going to have massive congestion in major cities. You're going to have migration and war, and it's going to be a big mess.
Right.
Not to be dramatic, but...
And I understand that through that technology, the users or the farmers are able to save 80% of water from wasting. I'm interested to know what is the magic, like how does that happen?
You know, it's interesting because we didn't invent something new. Irrigation's been around for a really long time, so is solar. We basically took an old technology which contributes to a massive amount of greenhouse gas emissions. We decarbonized it and deployed it in a place that's resource rich. So a lot of people, a lot of land, a lot of water, etc. The magic isn't actually how do you get that to people, so the financing, the services, etc. But the impact that a little bit of water can have is like remarkable. You have nearly 100% of our customers are making more food, they're making more money. They're doing so without expanding land under irrigation, so it's all intensification. Nearly 100% of our customers report improving their way of life. The women of the household who are the ones actually farming are saving 17 hours a week that they use physically moving 45-pound buckets of water. So the impact is just like, if you're having a bad day, go to the field. But the funniest one, and the one that I think exemplifies the impact the most, is I was visiting a customer a few weeks ago, and this is the second time someone said this to me, but I asked her, what are you going to do? What are you excited about now that, you have this? She goes, I'm going to get fat. I was like, what? She's like, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to get fat. And it's that sort of like, I can have a leisurely life, which I think people discount. And you just mentioned dignity when you were talking about impact. It's that, and it's remarkable.
Right.
So yeah, they're making a lot more money. They can make 5 times more money with irrigation. They're saving $40 to $80 a month on diesel and petrol fuel, but they're also just like participating in the economy with disposable income in a way they've never been able to do before. Buying more stuff, feeling like they can like do things with their money, and I think that's really important.
All right, good. And Erik, what will it take to have a universal battery swapping, a reality?
So a single battery for everything.
Yeah. Or I can swap my battery in Nigeria, in Congo.
I mean, you kind of have to look at the Duracell thing, because every single device is built around the Duracell battery. So you'd have to create an ecosystem where everybody was willing to design their products around a single battery. So it's a pretty big thing. I mean, the difference here is that the Duracell battery is, I don't know, a penny or whatever. Our batteries are just under $1,000. So it's a different thing, but you'd need that. You'd need to, I think, prove the build out of the scale of the battery, and then get a lot of OEMs to come and say, I believe this works. I'll build my products around it. Be that a lawnmower, a car, a motorcycle, an inverter, or whatever else. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think you need some scale there so that people go, I trust that this can work, and I'm willing to invest to build more products around it.
Mm-hmm. Talk about your battery in terms of the security, because most people, the safety rather, in terms of getting to a point where the explosions and stuff like that. How do you ensure that is taken care of?
Well, I mean, the risk on battery explosions and thermal runaway is really at the manufacturing point. So if you get a good quality supplier, the risk is mitigated there. Like it starts there. I guess, we monitor these batteries, so we can do things like predictive maintenance, try and see if there's issues with the battery. So you can monitor it and try and take action, but the most important thing is to get a good quality set of cells from a good quality supplier. And you also have a lot of emerging battery cell technology. So you've got something called NMC, which is the ones that tend to have thermal runaway. But a lot of the Tesla cars now, for example, are moving to something called LFP batteries, which don't have that volatility. So I think things probably in Africa will transition to the safer cells just because of the heat and things, but there's a blend of those kind of things. I mean, the cell technology is also developing at a rapid pace, really rapid pace. So it'll get safer and safer. But to be honest, petrol cars blow up. So it's not like it does happen that way.
All right.
They're all dangerous.
All right.
Well,
Good. And Steve, investing in startups since 2009, do you have a bias in any specific startups? The one that you look at and say, this one I have to consider, or
Well, and I'll try to bring it back to the climate theme in a minute. But in general, if we're investing in an a really early stage business, we're really backing the team rather than the plan. The only thing we know about the business plan is that it's wrong. So it's really, are they addressing a big enough problem in a big enough market? Do we have some pattern recognition? We understand the business model innovation or whatever that. We can diligence that, but a lot of it is, does the founding team have the character, the capacity, the ambition to build a big business from scratch? And actually, in Africa, that's harder to do than it is in the Silicon Valley. There are more speed bumps, there are more obstacles, there are more value chains are broken, and so you've got to often stitch together an end-to-end solution in a way that you might not have to. And Samir's point that he was making a minute ago with this climate-themed fund is Africa has got 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land, roughly, which is mainly managed by smallholder farmers. There's a massive opportunity to do agriculture in a way that's regenerative and sustainable that has already passed the West by. We've dumped lots of synthetic fertilizer on lots of industrial agricultural land, unsustainably. So there's a chance to leapfrog in agriculture. There's a chance to leapfrog in the urbanization that's frankly going to happen anyway. Yeah. What is it? There's like 7 million people every 4 months moving to urban, like building a city the size of London every 4 months on the continent. That's what's happening. Without the disaster scenario. That's actually what's happening with the sort of steady state. So we got to think about, how do we do cities differently? Well, there's a ton of stuff going on with challenges, but in EV mobility, in the built environment, in circular economy, in waste management, and so on. And we don't have in Africa, maybe with the exception of Nigeria to some extent and South Africa, the legacy vested interest in a hydrocarbon-based world. So again, there's an opportunity for, all the leapfrog story, and everybody trots out, sort of fixed line telephony was leapfrog, banking was leapfrog straight to mobile money. But it's not just a cliche. If you don't have that legacy vested infrastructure, you can jump to something that's better. And so there's an opportunity to do cities differently, an opportunity to do agriculture differently. There's an opportunity to leverage the vast natural resources on the continent to perhaps use carbon credits and to use kind of carbon farming as a way of paying the green premium for the mass market to make solutions like solar powered drip irrigation more affordable for smallholder farmers instead of just people who can pay up front for those systems. So I think there's so much going on now. That's what gets me excited, is the opportunities, and we're not really focused on, but I love what you're doing on the kind of on the blue economy as well. It's a massive opportunity, and now there's this rise of much more mature entrepreneurship that's going on. There's more capital backing these types of potentially breakthrough businesses.
Mm-hmm. And to you, Lucretia, talk about the, investing in the blue economy. The returns are not as fast as, other sectors. Does that, in your perspective, is that keeping people, shying away from, creating solutions in terms of startups that work around the blue economy?
Yes and no. I think for blue especially, a lot of the solutions have a hardware component. And if you're talking about hardware, it does scale very different from software platforms or pure software play. And also it's not as asset light if you're talking about hardware, right? So you're going to have to give it time. And then, in Africa, you also have other, friction that you have to consider. So I do think when it comes to impact investment, and this is for climate in general, it's a very different play to fintech, to edtech, to the other software plays, in that you have to think about your funding instruments a little more creatively and a little different, because what's happened with the Africa story is that we've always kind of tried to force fit some of the Silicon Valley models and instruments that just don't work for the continent in general. So when we look at our portfolio, for example, it was like a 10 to 12 year investment horizon that we're looking at, but they managed to do exit with some of the, solutions within 5 years. Katapult Ocean is quite early in itself. It was founded in 2018. But when you look at the journey, it does need patient capital. But I think the African continent has always needed patient capital in general. And then there are some opportunities that, it's a pure green play, so it has to be evergreen. When I think about just the limited exits that I've seen in my 18 years in investments in Africa, it speaks to thinking about exits or partial exits maybe in more creative ways. I love, there's a voice that coming up, one of my Oxford professors, Oni Peyton Parker, if you've attended Africa Venture Finance class, you've heard about her talking about blended funding instruments and thinking more about debt instruments instead of just the traditional equity instruments for VC, and rethinking the whole VC play and business model altogether, particularly for impact and climate. You really want to see other financial instruments come to play. You really want to work with partners and collaborate with from DFIs to governments to whoever's involved, people that are thinking, that are kind of curious about how else can we do this? What would be the better fit for this thing that we're trying to create, instead of the top-down approach of this is the standard VC model and we're going to force fit it everywhere. So you have to think creatively around it.
Mm-hmm. And obviously when people think ocean, they think, the mass water bodies. They don't remember we have the rivers, the streams. So how do you ensure, or rather how would you advise that people think about, the streams, because the pollution also begins from the very stream in that village?
Yeah, so the early stage ventures that we're working on, I want to put it in the context of Africa especially. I'm actually leading a collaboration between Katapult Ocean and our ground partner Ocean Hub Africa that are incubating very early stage businesses that are venturing in different ways, from fertilizer manufacturing, from anything that has to do with decarbonization, recycling on the ground. But it's very early stage ventures. But we've had the Norwegian government come in with some funding to support, that initiative. So there's a lot of education that's still happening. Every time I tell people that I'm in blue economy, they're like, what's that? Because it's very nascent still on the continent. But that's how every story starts. That's where Katapult started. In 2018, hardly anyone in Europe was focused on ocean as a vertical. But the way we're looking at it and thinking about it is that, we've got this untapped infrastructure, especially in Africa, around the ocean, and how we are integrated into our day-to-day. We really need to start thinking about it. I'm planting a seed even today, speaking to people around, what it is that we're seeing in ocean. When we talk about ocean investments, we've got a shipping industry across the world, including Africa. How do we think about that? Do you ever think of how much emissions and how that pollutes our environment and what we're doing about that? So we're trying to, still educate people around climate change and CO2 emissions and how we can start to think about decarbonization. If we think about our portfolio, it's really about knowledge share that we want to happen from across all the continents. And that's really the message, the main message.
Thank you. And Samir, in Africa, when you say smallholder farmers, because most farmers there produce food to eat, they are not really commercial minded, and obviously technology to them down in the village becomes expensive. So how do you ensure that the woman, my grandmother in the village, can afford the technology to produce food and at the same time not to go hungry?
That's the core of everything, right? Like, if you look at the reason why yields in Africa are so much lower than world averages is because only 4% of the continent is irrigated versus in Asia it's like 37%. The reason is because it's too expensive. So both the fuel for the water pumps and the water pumps themselves are too expensive. So what we do is we lend, so farmers can pay us in monthly installments up to 30 months. And we also generate carbon credits by displacing diesel and petrol pumps. And then we sell those carbon credits in the market, and we use those revenues to subsidize our customers. We work in countries where there's no government subsidies. I was on the board of the Kenya Revenue Authority for a year, which is like the HMRC equivalent in Kenya. And I saw from the inside, like, there's no money. No one has any money to give any incentives. So we have to figure out ways to keep lowering the price for what we do. So we lend so people can spread out that payment. So your grandma doesn't have to pay us all up front. And then we also then give subsidies with carbon credits.
Erik, talk about in terms of the batteries, the convenience it provides to electric bike users or EVs. How much has it changed in terms of convenience?
I guess let me think. Our key metric of our success to our customer is making sure that when they turn up at a station, they get a fully charged battery in less than 2 minutes, which is kind of equivalent to filling petrol at a pump. So we try and measure ourselves against that. And we don't want the experience to feel that different, actually. It should just be very natural in how it works. I guess the nice thing with the battery is that we can digitize everything. And so we can show riders information on their energy use that you would never be able to achieve with petrol. And so I'd say it's an early day for us on that, but I think the experience there becomes a lot richer. Like, they understand what they're using. They can quantify their costs better. We do some of that today. I think right now we're on the stage of building all this stuff out, but I think there you can improve a customer relationship with their energy use drastically. Because petrol, you just sink it in, and actually you could just tap and steal it if you want to. You can't steal electrons. Not that easy. So it has a lot of added value, but I think we're on a growth curve on that to see how we can really tap into the customer value in all these different areas.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. So we are going to take some questions from the floor, but before that, Steve, do you see a trend in maybe the last few years on the amount of startups or the kind of startup that are coming to you for funding? Do you see a certain trend, and do you see a gap in some area?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a tip to somebody.
Yeah, look, I think, and the data bears this out too, so it's not just our experience. There's always a sort of bias for a venture capital fund. You raise a fund and all of a sudden you become very popular and everybody starts kind of laughing at your jokes. I think the fact is, though, the data says that climate has been one of the most dynamic sort of themes. It's not really a sector, but kind of thematic on the continent. And I think for the fundamental reasons that I was trying to explain earlier, and also for, frankly, examples like Kofa and Sunculture, where you've got companies that are showing success, and so that attracts more entrepreneurship and more capital. And so I feel like that flywheel is building in the climate area, which is encouraging. I think, there are always gaps because there's so much opportunity and so much need. You raised the question before about some of these other kind of, call them secondary, tertiary markets, which are also interesting. So we're paying, this third fund is our first fund that's Pan-African. So we've made our first investment in Egypt, actually last month. But I think we also see opportunities a lot more opportunities in West Africa. And I think I'm thinking of not Nigeria, but I'm thinking of Francophone West Africa. Obviously, we have seen deal flow in Uganda and Rwanda, but those businesses need to be able to scale outside of those countries to be successful. So I think there are gaps all over the place. But I think for us, focused now where we are, we see lots of deal flow and lots of opportunities coming in the climate space. And because there's so many different aspects of this. And some of it, I'll maybe just end with this, is that we also see kind of a chain of connectivity. So, for example, if you think about everything from, we see companies now that are recycling mobile phones. Okay, so those are, now, what's the climate impact? The climate impact of that is actually bigger than you would think if you do the numbers on it. But of course, it's making now a smartphone much more affordable. And that's a productivity tool, right? It's not just a kind of surfing tool, it's a productivity tool. And that gets connected to things like quick commerce or e-commerce, which is increasingly becoming e-mobility, kind of e-driven, right? So it becomes a clean way of getting e-commerce to work. Groceries delivered, food delivered, and so on. And you need the battery swapping, you need the OEM EVs, you need kind of fleet management, you need sort of asset finance for the riders. But then those guys going up into the food systems. And so the company that we backed in Egypt, Breadfast, is now doing 30% of their SKUs are own brand, contract manufacturing. So they're now going up to the farmers to, kind of, and increasing their businesses. So there's linkages in this kind of climate or this green economy that are pretty exciting to kind of see them stitching together over the next decade.
Wow, good. Any questions from us? Just shoot whoever you want to. If it's a general question, any of them will. Yes, please.
Thank you for a very insightful conversation. My name is Olaolu and I'm with HSBC. My question is to Samir. You did mention that you use carbon credits to subsidize your products. So my question is just, how does that work practically? How do you sell those credits? And then also, just to get your thoughts on the carbon markets in Africa generally, like what do you think is the current situation, and any thoughts on how Africa can really tap into this really untapped potential we have in the carbon markets? Yeah.
So I'll start with the last question. I think what's really interesting about carbon is that it almost like it's a commercial subsidy that allows you to scale technologies. And it allows you to make things cheaper in a commercial way, so you're not relying on governments, etc. I think for Africa to unlock its carbon potential, we need good regulation in place. At the end of the day, we sell carbon credits in the voluntary market, but where the depth is, where there's a lot of funding available, where prices are locked in, it's in the government market or the compliance market. And for a company like ours to be able to participate in that government market, we have to have regulations in the countries we operate be in place. So the single biggest thing to unlock carbon markets in Africa is for the countries to get their regulations in order quickly. Kenya is making good progress. There's progress being made, but you need to figure out the corruption problem. You need to figure out getting talented people in to put regulation in place. So regulation is in place, carbon markets unlock massively. Practically speaking, we sell carbon credits in the voluntary market. So that's all the companies that make their net zero commitments and they don't want to end up in the news or in the Guardian or on John Oliver or anything, and they have to go and buy carbon credits. I think the future of our business is selling it to governments or to airlines. That's the regulated market, because the prices are so much higher and we can give way bigger discounts to our customers. But I think in general, what's lacking in carbon markets in Africa, I think that might have been your first question of where it's going, is you have a lot of really smart companies who are doing it. Actually, a couple of their portfolio companies I think are some of the smartest in the carbon space, but you don't have a lot of investors who are knowledgeable about carbon. And you don't have a lot of lenders who are comfortable understanding carbon. So you have very few debt facilities in place. You have very few sort of receivables financing facilities in place. There's a huge education gap because there's a lot of the carbon market which is absolute shit. Mm-hmm. And it's being run by people who are fraudsters, who are just carbon cowboys, who are just doing BS. And it's absolutely wrong, but there's a whole lot of really good stuff happening. And because of all the crap going on, people are having a hard time figuring out what's real and what's not real. So there's a massive amount of education that needs to take place to get people comfortable with it, because there's a lot of really good stuff going on that requires financing and can help investors make a lot of returns. And I think it's like, how do we help people understand what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, etc. And I think that's where the big opportunity is. So funds like Novastar are doing a lot of that space. Companies like us and a few others are doing a lot of education. It's like a lot of like education roadshows to get people up to speed on how to look at carbon, how do you diligence carbon markets, etc. Because it's real, and there's a lot of scale to be had by using carbon.
Can I just add to what Samir said, because he implicated us in this. I think, so I mean, Sunculture is doing it right. We've two companies that he referenced, Cocoa Networks, who are using carbon as an energy subsidy for bioethanol cooking. They're selling actually now in the compliance market in Corsia, which is the airline. So super high quality. Sistema Bio that's doing kind of, the sort of modular biogas for family farmers. Again, very high quality kind of carbon asset, but it is a trust market. And I think in fairness that because frankly some of the registries haven't been very rigorous, and there has been just a bit of slipshod things going on, bad publicity, the trust has been damaged and it needs to be restored. But it is a massive opportunity for companies like Sunculture, Cocoa, Sistema, and others to be able to use. I mean, it's a subsidy, but actually it's an externality that should be paid for by somebody, right? It's a real cost to the planet. And so that's what the carbon market should be doing, is forcing people to pay that subsidy or pay for that externality, which then can be used to distribute amazing, life-changing products and services like Sunculture's drip irrigation systems to people who otherwise couldn't afford to pay the green premium, because all of these solutions have cost parity with what they were doing before, basically. It needs to be as affordable, as convenient. Otherwise, someone who's a subsistence farmer is not going to do something that's going to save the planet 50 years from now if it costs them more money. But they will adopt in a heartbeat something that's better if it's affordable. And I think that's the thing. We unlock that, and you see, massive change. Cocoa's now serving a third of Nairobi's households in 5 years with a cooking solution that substitutes charcoal.
And here's like the thing I think people are missing is that in every other part of the world, in the global north, there's a ton of subsidies in place. Incentives for farmers, incentive for electricity, all the stuff we're doing is essentially distributed infrastructure and energy and food, etc. And every infrastructure project in the world has massive amounts of subsidies, but in Africa there are none. So carbon is essentially like a market mechanism that's a real market mechanism that allows us to level the playing field for people to buy things that can improve their lives, where in other markets where they have massive amounts of subsidies.
Yes, any more questions? Do we have enough time for a couple? Yes. Yes. Do you have any questions? In the meantime, we'll just get like a
Sorry,
remark.
I actually have a question.
There is? Okay.
Right, so you've been talking about the blue economy, Lucretia, and I think it's one of those areas that is often overlooked. What are some of the challenges that you're actually finding with people trying to, with startups or businesses that are actually getting into this particular space? Because when we're talking about the blue economy, we're talking about the ocean, we're talking about those who farm in the ocean, we're talking about some of the major ship liners who are basically moving across the ocean. We're talking about communities that are living by the ocean. There are lots of different elements of what the blue economy represents.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges that you're actually finding in terms of startups or just people thinking about, right, what are the things we need to be thinking about in terms of the challenges that we're having around the ocean, and hence then coming up with ideas? Because you know what, we're not really talking about it. I mean, I don't know about any of you lot in the room, but there's not much conversation around the blue economy at all. So it'd be just interesting to find out why.
Well, it's new. I think it's coming up. It's like when climate first came, right? Everyone thought of it as impact and almost as philanthropy funds, and people want to talk about return in most forums, because if you're using private capital especially, people want to know about returns and exit, and so it's not sexy and always is exciting. And also when you just think about the Africa Tech, how it's sort of grown and developed over the years. It's not coming from coastal communities. It's not coming from agriculture, but more and more the conversation around impact is really around inclusion, right? When we talk about financial inclusion, all of a sudden it goes beyond the urban centers, and we think about climate, it's beyond what's happening in the urban centers. It's now what's happening with your grandmother, like you said, and how do we make sure that she can afford and access all these technologies that are there to make her think differently about her just about basic stuff like how she manages herself around her smallholder farm, or if it's fisheries, we're thinking about how the fishing community is not extractive, but thinking about what will happen to my children who might not leave this coastal region in regard to how I'm working around marine and biodiversity and all the things that we talk about in blue. I think the challenge is that sometimes it's so technical, and there are a lot of scientists involved in this space that when they start talking about decarbonization and carbon capture, or when he talks about his solution around batteries, there's a lot of science to it, but I think it's a language issue where we need to simplify it as much as possible. I was very proud of my daughter's school, because when I left, they were doing SDG 15, life on land. And so when I say to the teacher, you know what, I'm actually on my way to the United Nations next week to talk about life below water, I was surprised when she said, can you come from your trip? I'll be tired, but can you come from your trip and actually address the school on what that means, what's happening around that, And what excites me and gives me hope about Africa especially is that we've got a very young, we always talk about it, right? That, you know, we have the highest youngest population in the world. And they don't accept status quo. So the way my 14-year-old understands the ocean and life on land and the educational material that they are now being exposed to is very different. So yes, it's very new, but I think we're giving it to a generation that's open and curious and just they don't accept the status quo. So that's what gives me hope. But yes, there's a lot of education that still needs to happen.
All right. Time is out. I don't know if you have 2 seconds for any last words. There has to be. Are you good? All right. Okay, good. I appreciate your time, gentlemen and lady. All right, good.